Hey, what's up? Just want to thank you guys for watching our channel. Please hit that subscribe button. The idea of openly admitting that you're going to make mistakes, I love that. Tobias Harris and I used to always, he was a very black and white person. And, you know, if something went wrong, or if somebody was doing something wrong, he just couldn't get past it. You know what I mean? And he in some ways, we were talking about perfection, he in some way, and I discussed this with him on the pod, so I'm not saying anything that isn't already out there, but you know, he in some ways, if it wasn't perfect, it was really bothering him. And I used to live that way as well. and I found that the gray is very peaceful. It's very zen. Mm-hmm. And it's this idea of embracing the gray. As a player, you're going to make mistakes. And I think sometimes as a player, if you make the same mistakes, not continuously, but time and again, there's a narrative that develops around you. And I think it's the same thing for coaches, right? This coach is not great in this situation. This coach is not great in that situation. Yeah. Are you ever worried about narratives around you and the mistakes you make building to something that you get now labeled as Joe Mazzulla, the guy who can't do this?
Yeah. The only label I care about is what my players say and my family. And so I don't care about what the labels are. What I don't want is A, the players to believe them, and B, to coach a certain way to where the players don't believe in what my philosophy is. And so, you know, you take an example of something that may happen in a game, and I'm sure we'll bring it up, or it's I'm labeled as the coach that doesn't call a timeout.
We're going to talk about this.
I figured we were, so I might as well, I beat you to it. Right? And I'll tell you what, I stand by my philosophy. Where I have to get better at is the organization of my philosophy. And that's where I didn't have time as a coach. And so I still believe in certain situations a timeout is not the best decision. Where I wasn't good at as a coach was organizing my team properly to take advantage of that situation. I didn't teach the philosophy well enough. I had the philosophy, but I didn't teach it well. And so the narrative doesn't bother me. What bothers me is I didn't do a good job of putting our players in the best possible position to succeed. And that's a goal of mine heading into the season is okay, I've had 1 year, I've built some philosophies, but now I got to double down on my teaching. And I got to double down on the organization. And I got to make sure that I stand by the philosophy, that we agree on it as a team, but then also that I do a great job of organizing our guys to put them in the best possible position.
Yeah. I think it was the second game I called. I had a Friday, Sunday game in March. I think it was the Knicks game where you didn't call a timeout.
Yeah. And
I don't think you guys got a shot off because Tatum ended up catching the ball on the right wing with 2 seconds to go. And then we're game 4 in Philly. We're not calling timeout. And just to review a little bit, they score. We can talk about the help off the strong side corner all we want, but Harden hits the 3. And there's time. And I think there's a lot of coaches who don't call a timeout in that play because then they don't want to get the defensive unit for the other team, right? Yeah. It could have been McDaniels. It could have been DeAnthony Melton, right? They're all of a sudden there in the game. Yeah. And you got Maxey in the game, right? So you don't call a timeout. There's also what you said after the game, your quotes after the game, you were talking about, I trust my players. I trust my players in that situation, which, again, I 100% agree with. But I also think, not for you necessarily, but I also think for a lot of coaches who sit there for 4 or 5 minutes throughout the course of a game, live action, no dead balls, right? Mm-hmm. There's no control. And I think for a lot of coaches, they like that control at the end of the game. Yeah. There's coaches that just want to call a timeout. Mm-hmm. And I want to draw something up. I want to be set. I want to be organized. Yeah. And so I think there's this really tough balance to find between all of that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And when you talk about teaching that, what does that mean specifically?
I mean, I just did the philosophy's right. I think there was 10, 11 seconds, 12 seconds or something like that. I think
it's 14 to start.
14 to start. If you were to tell me you can guarantee the ball in one of your best players' hands with 14 seconds on the clock to go make a play, you would take that every day of the week. Where I failed as a coach is we didn't have a 14-second play. We didn't have an 8-second play to go fast enough.
Yeah. So you're talking about in a practice throughout the season.
Yes. So I have to get better at practicing that, of organizing that, of giving an example of hey guys, there's 14 on the clock. This is what we're going to. This is when we have to shoot it by. This is what happens if it goes in. This is what happens if it doesn't. And so, like I said, I had the philosophy, but I didn't properly teach the steps towards executing it. And I think that's where you have to grow. That's where I have to grow as a coach. But also there are times where you do have to call it. The one that sticks out to me is at home versus the Warriors, where we're down 3 and there's no timeout, and it's like bedlam. And Smart kicks it to JB and it goes in. And after the game, Steve Kerr's like, we really thought they were going to call it timeout. Right? So there's always the other side of that, but we were more organized. And so it's just about believing in something, but then teaching it, organizing it, and working at it. And we just have to get better. I have to get better at that.
Yeah. That same weekend in March, by the way, you guys lose to Brooklyn after having a big lead. And in the pregame, and I think I've used this on the podcast before, in the pregame interview with you, when we asked you about Friday night, you said, we just got out-mathed. And I was like, yes, I love this. I love this. When did you embrace, we're going to talk about the three-point shooting side, but just analytics in general.
Yeah.
And not just using your gut and your eyes as like the guide for everything. When did that start?
So this is a loaded question, right? That game was when I felt like I let my team down emotionally, because we didn't have
the Brooklyn game.
Yeah. We didn't have, two things are true. Two things can be true at the same time. I don't know if you believe that, but I love to believe that.
Of course.
So we did get out-mathed, and I let our team down emotionally because we didn't have the proper tools to handle momentum swings. So from that game forward, we started putting together momentum edits, and we started studying momentum within NBA games. And so maybe every other day we would have 10 to 12 clips of different pockets of the game, no matter what quarter it was, where it's like, this is why this was a close game in the fourth quarter. You're up 10 with 3 minutes to go at the end of the third, and you give up a 5-0 run. Now, like being down 5 and start the fourth is way different than being down 10 to start the fourth. And closing quarters, ending quarters, all that stuff came from that game. And so I can easily say this now. I learned from that one, right? So we really made a conscious effort. I was like, that's the game where I was like, hey, I really screwed my team. But we did get out-mathed. And so I'm sitting in there, and it came from, so when I was a D2 assistant at Glenville my first year, I had a counter, and I was counting possessions. And a coach in the other league was like, what are you doing? And like, I was just sitting there with like a counter, possession go by, I'd get it. And like, I would do all the math from Dean Oliver's book at halftime, and I would have it. I would do it after the game, and I would log the possession, and then I would do it every 5 games. And so I was just literally counting possessions. So that's kind of like where it started. It's at the D2 level where you can do anything you want. Like you can do anything you want in Division II. Like there's 100 to 500 people at the game. You're never on the bottom ticker. If you wanted to,
play 5-on-4.
You would do it and nobody would care. Like, so that's where I like became creative and innovative. And so that's kind of where it started.